As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. Goodfellas wasn't just a mob movie, it was a raw, unflinching masterclass in chaos, loyalty, and betrayal. Behind the polished final cut, Martin Scorsese's gangster classic was plagued by on-set tempers, grueling realism, and shocking improvisations that nearly derailed the production. Guns were swapped for real ones, actors clashed with crew, and some scenes got so brutal they made even hardened mobsters uneasy. Today we're uncovering 20 weird facts about Goodfellas, details of casting chaos, dangerous stunts, studio pushback, and the bizarre lengths actors went to for authenticity. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a revelation so unexpected it rewrites how you see the film's most iconic scenes. So grab your shine box, because this is going to get wild. Let's dive in. Ray Liotta's mother died during filming. Ray Liotta, who played Henry Hill, was carrying unimaginable grief while shooting. In the middle of production, his mother passed away from cancer. Instead of halting his work, Liotta used his pain to fuel Henry's emotional intensity. The breakdown in the courtroom scene, where he admits his life as a gangster is over, hits differently once you know it wasn't just acting. It was raw grief spilling onto the screen. Director Martin Scorsese later revealed he encouraged Liotta to channel his mourning into the character, creating one of the most powerful performances in mob cinema. What audiences didn't realize is that behind Henry Hill's collapse was Liotta's real-life heartbreak, preserved forever on film. Joe Pesci's Funny How was unscripted, one of the most quoted moments in cinema. Funny how? Funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you? Wasn't in the script? Joe Pesci based the exchange on an experience from his real life when he once called a mobster funny and nearly got killed for it. Scorsese loved the story so much that he told Pesci and Ray Liotta to improvise it during rehearsals. The nervous laughter you see on screen from the other actors? It's real. They didn't know where the scene was going, and the tension in the room is palpable. What audiences didn't know is that one of cinema's most legendary mob confrontations was born out of genuine fear and unpredictable improvisation. Real mobsters were extras. Scorsese wanted authenticity, and he got it by hiring actual mob associates as extras. Many of the background faces you see in the wedding scenes and nightclub sequences weren't professional actors. They were real guys connected to the underworld. The production even received requests from mobsters asking to appear in the film. According to crew accounts, some cast members felt uneasy acting out violent scenes in front of men who had committed the real thing. Not only did this give Goodfellas its haunting realism, but it blurred the line between performance and reality, leaving everyone on set with the unsettling sense that the mafia wasn't just on screen, it was watching them. The cocaine scenes were uncomfortably real. When Henry Hill spirals into paranoia near the film's end, it feels terrifyingly real. And that's because Ray Liotta leaned into method-style acting. He stayed awake for days to look jittery and unhinged. His bloodshot eyes and nervous pacing weren't crafted in makeup. They were Liotta's body breaking down. Scorsese heightened this authenticity by keeping the cameras rolling long past rehearsals, capturing Liotta's raw anxiety. Crew members later admitted the energy on set during these sequences felt dangerous. It wasn't just a performance, it was a man unraveling before their eyes, giving Goodfellas its infamous edge of frantic, unstoppable chaos. Robert De Niro called Henry Hill 7 times a day. Robert De Niro's commitment to accuracy bordered on obsession, playing Jimmy Conway, a character based on real-life mobster Jimmy Burke. De Niro phoned Henry Hill, the actual gangster, up to 7 times a day. He'd grill him for tiny details. How did Jimmy light his cigarette? How much did he tip waiters? Did he order his scotch with water or ice? Hill later admitted that De Niro captured Burke's mannerisms so perfectly it was eerie to watch. not X, but Y. De Niro wasn't just playing a role, he was building a living ghost of a man so dangerous that even from prison, Burke's shadow loomed over Hollywood. The Copacabana shot was a nightmare to pull off. The legendary 3-minute tracking shot through the Copacabana is one of the most famous in film history. But what looks effortless was a logistical nightmare. Scorsese originally planned to film Henry and Karen entering through the front, but the club wouldn't allow it. Instead, he improvised a backdoor journey through the kitchen, hallways, and finally into the showroom. The Steadicam operator had to perfectly weave through tight spaces while actors, waiters, cooks, and stagehands hit their cues. One small mistake meant restarting from the beginning. It took 8 takes to get it right, and every time the tension mounted. What audiences didn't know is that one of cinema's smoothest sequences was born from chaos and desperation, turning an obstacle into a masterpiece of cinematic choreography. The real Henry Hill loved the movie too much. Henry Hill, the real-life mobster whose life story inspired Goodfellas, adored the film. After entering witness protection, he'd often brag that Scorsese's adaptation made him famous again. The irony? Hill's notoriety made him too recognizable, and he was eventually kicked out of witness protection for repeatedly outing himself. He reportedly showed up at screenings, introducing himself with, "I'm the real Henry Hill." For him, the film wasn't just art, it was validation. But it also exposed his reckless ego, proving that even under FBI protection, Hill couldn't resist. Basking in the gangster lifestyle Goodfellas immortalized. The movie gave him a second taste of fame, but it also accelerated his downfall. Improvised violence made actors nervous. While many scenes followed Scorsese's script, bursts of violence were often left open to improvisation. During the barroom assault where Pesci's Tommy kills Billy Batts, the actors weren't told exactly how far Pesci would take it. The terror on Frank Vincent's face when he's stomped is uncomfortably real. Crew members later recalled the atmosphere as electric, but also disturbing. No one knew when Pesci would stop. Scorsese believed this unpredictability kept the violence raw and authentic, but it also pushed actors into dangerous territory. What audiences didn't know is that those brutal outbursts felt just as shocking on set as they did in theaters. Lorraine Bracco fought for Karen's voice. Lorraine Bracco, who played Karen Hill, didn't want her character reduced to a mob wife stereotype. She pushed Scorsese to include Karen's perspective, insisting on the famous voiceover narration. Her line, "I know there are women like my best friends who would have gotten out of there the minute their husband gave them a gun to hide, but I didn't," wasn't just character development, it was Bracco's victory. She later admitted that the narration gave Karen depth, transforming her from background player to one of the film's strongest voices. Without Bracco's fight, Goodfellas might have silenced the women who lived in the shadows of mob life. Warner Brothers hated the film at first. Here's the kicker: Warner Brothers executives initially despised Goodfellas. At the first test screening, audience members walked out in droves because the violence was so relentless. The studio panicked, telling Scorsese to tone it down or risk a flop. But Scorsese refused, cutting only seconds but keeping the brutality intact. What executives saw as career-ending excess became a landmark in cinematic realism. The test scores were among the worst in Warner Brothers history, yet today Goodfellas is ranked among the greatest films ever made. And before we get to the next fact, go ahead and like and subscribe, because just like Warner Brothers doubted Scorsese, people doubt how deep we'll go. But trust me, we're just getting started. 11. The real FBI helped film the helicopter paranoia. When Henry Hill spirals into paranoia, convinced helicopters are following him, Scorsese wanted it grounded in truth. The production actually consulted FBI surveillance experts to choreograph how helicopters would stalk a suspect without being too obvious. They explained tactics like circling patterns and timing shifts, which Scorsese used in the sequence. The result? a claustrophobic scene that audiences swore felt real because it was informed by real surveillance methods. Ray Liotta later admitted that he stayed in character all day, twitchy and jumpy, as if the FBI was actually watching him. What audiences didn't know is that federal law enforcement literally influenced one of cinema's most frantic breakdowns. Al Pacino turned down the film and regretted it. Before Robert De Niro signed on, the role of Jimmy Conway was offered to Al Pacino. He turned it down, fearing he'd be typecast in gangster films after the Godfather trilogy and Scarface. Ironically, Pacino chose instead to star in Dick Tracy that same year, a decision he later called a mistake. Pacino admitted he passed on one of Scorsese's greatest films and kicked himself for it. Not missed opportunity, but fate, because De Niro's obsessive commitment made Jimmy Conway iconic. Still, imagine Pacino's fiery energy in Goodfellas. Hollywood might have had an entirely different mob classic. Joe Pesci nearly got fired. Scorsese loved Joe Pesci's intensity, but Warner Brothers executives weren't convinced. They feared Pesci's explosive temper and unpredictable improvisations would derail the film. One studio exec even suggested replacing him mid-production, but Scorsese fought back, insisting Pesci's volatility was exactly what the role of Tommy DeVito needed. When Pesci won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, he proved Scorsese right. The irony? His entire acceptance speech was just 5 words. "It's my privilege. Thank you, a quiet end to a role defined by thunderous rage." What audiences didn't know is that Tommy almost never made it to the screen. The Layla montage wasn't in the script. The haunting montage of mobsters' corpses set to Derek and the Domino's Layla wasn't part of the original plan. Scorsese crafted it during editing, realizing the mournful piano outro could underscore the bloody aftermath of the Lufthansa heist. The contrast between the serene music and gruesome visuals created one of cinema's most chilling juxtapositions. Editor Thelma Schoonmaker said it was one of those happy accidents born in the editing room. What audiences didn't know is that one of Goodfellas' most iconic sequences was an improvisation, not a blueprint. Proof that sometimes the greatest cinematic moments are found, not planned. Frank Vincent took revenge years later. In Goodfellas, Pesci's Tommy stomps Billy Batts, played by Frank Vincent, to death. The brutality left Vincent physically bruised and emotionally shaken. Years later, Scorsese gave Vincent a form of cinematic revenge in Casino, 1995, where Pesci's character meets an even more violent end. Vincent reportedly joked, "Now we're even." Not just casting, but catharsis. Scorsese understood mob stories weren't just about blood. They were about cycles, vengeance, and brutal irony. What audiences didn't know is that one of the most gruesome beatdowns in Goodfellas set up a poetic, blood-soaked payback years later on screen. The movie almost got an X rating. Scorsese's vision of unflinching mob violence came at a cost. The MPAA nearly slapped Goodfellas with an X rating. The brutality of the Billy Batts murder and Tommy's execution were deemed excessive. Warner Brothers panicked, fearing an X would destroy box office prospects. Scorsese trimmed frames, literally a few seconds of stomps and blood splatters, to squeak into an R rating. He refused to sanitize the film, arguing that the mob's violence should feel ugly and relentless. In the end, Scorsese's gamble worked. What audiences didn't realize is that the version they saw was just inches away from being banned from mainstream theaters, preserved only because of a few strategic cuts. Ray Liotta refused to meet the real Henry Hill before filming. Unlike De Niro, who peppered Hill with phone calls, Ray Liotta chose distance. He didn't want his performance shaped by the real Henry Hill's charisma. Instead, he read transcripts, FBI files, and Nicholas Pileggi's book, Wise Guy. Liotta feared that Hill's charm might soften his portrayal of a man complicit in brutal crimes. Ironically, after the film's release, Hill praised Liotta for getting him right, even though they never spoke before filming, not imitation, but interpretation. Liotta wasn't copying Henry Hill. He was building a darker, more conflicted version that Scorsese wanted audiences to confront. A gun nearly went off on set. During filming of the spider scene where Pesci's Tommy shoots Michael Imperioli's character in the foot, a malfunctioning prop gun nearly caused disaster. Crew members later admitted the weapon misfired during rehearsal, creating panic. After adjustments, Scorsese allowed filming to continue, but the tension on set was palpable. Imperioli's anguished reaction, flailing and screaming, is chilling because it carried a shadow of real fear. What audiences didn't know is that the violence in Goodfellas wasn't just simulated, it came dangerously close to bleeding into reality. The cast stayed in character off camera. To maintain the film's relentless tone, Scorsese encouraged actors to live like their mob characters between takes. De Niro would brood silently, Pesci barked orders at crew, and Liotta paced nervously, chain-smoking. Lorraine Bracco even cooked dinners for cast members in character as Karen. This immersive approach created an atmosphere where the mob world never switched off. Extras reported feeling like they were in the mafia during filming. Not role-playing, but world-building, Scorsese wasn't directing a movie. He was orchestrating a living, breathing mob ecosystem that blurred the line between fiction and reality. The final freeze frame was a studio compromise. Scorsese wanted Henry Hill's testimony scene to end bleakly, with Hill disappearing into a faceless suburbia. Warner Brothers argued it was too depressing. The compromise? A bold freeze frame of Liotta firing a gun directly at the camera, echoing the Great Train Robbery, 1903. This homage wasn't just cinematic flair. It was Scorsese's middle finger to Hollywood, reminding audiences that mob life doesn't end with dignity, only with betrayal and exile. What audiences didn't know is that the film's unforgettable final image exists because of a fight between art and commerce and Scorsese's refusal to fully surrender. The real mob watched closely. While Goodfellas was in production, the real New York mob monitored it carefully. Scorsese and the cast received veiled warnings not to get things wrong. Ray Liotta recalled being shadowed by men who just wanted to see what I was doing. Even wardrobe wasn't immune. Costume designers were told mob wives might complain if the clothes weren't accurate. What audiences didn't know is that Goodfellas wasn't just about the mafia, it was made under its watchful eye. In a way, the mob left fingerprints all over the film, making its authenticity not just cinematic but frighteningly real. Goodfellas wasn't just a gangster film, it was a dangerous experiment in blurring the line between cinema and reality. From real mob extras to FBI-inspired surveillance, from actors channeling grief to near-on-set accidents, the film lived on the edge of chaos. 30 years later, its legacy endures, not just as entertainment, but as a chilling reminder of how close Hollywood sometimes gets to the real thing. So, if you learned something new about Goodfellas, drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe. And remember, in the world of mob movies, the truth is always stranger than fiction.